So let's say you're living in Mexico and you have some sort of emergency. What do? That's what we're going to cover in this video. I'm Brighton and I'm here in La Paz, actually in Centenario outside La Paz, and I've got a really information-packed video today. I'm learning all of this stuff too. I actually sent a list of questions in, and the local fire department, police, ambulance people, they're going to answer all these questions that I'm sure you're having the same questions I did. Okay, I've donned my mask here as all the municipal employees are wearing them. I'm going to start with the very simple question, and that is, what do you do when you have an emergency? Should you call 911? Do you call an ambulance service? So I have got Francisco and Juan Manuel. Francisco is going to be doing all the translating for us, and he's going to work with a number of people here to give us the answers.
La comunicación es vía telefónica. The communication would be calling 911, or if you have the number, you could also call the fire department or the police directly. They have their own number as well.
So they mentioned calling 911 and 911 will get an ambulance to you. I'm going to talk a little bit more about specifically what you need to say, but we're going to go through some of the questions here with the folks that are able to answer them, the locals. The next question I had for these guys is, we're in La Paz. Well, specifically right now I'm in Centenario, just outside La Paz, but I want to know where these ambulances are from. They're private services. So really, I want to know more about how many are there? How many ambulances are there in a city the size of La Paz? And a lot of what we're talking about applies across Mexico. So I'm trying to make sure things that are specific to La Paz get answered specific to La Paz.
En La Paz existen un aproximado de 10 grupos.
There's about 10 groups or corporations that provide emergency services active. However, at times there's only 2 or 3 that are actually working, that are on call. And there's also times when there's none, where we don't have anyone on call. Here in our location, Centenario, we do have our ambulance. We just started, and so we're trying to have somebody active all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
So one of the things I learned about ambulances in Mexico is that many of them are private nonprofits and they can use your donations. It is something where when you call 911, they have a list of different ambulance services that have called in that day saying, we are operational with 2 ambulances or 3 ambulances, or maybe their ambulance is broken or out of gas or something's wrong with it. When you call, they will know who they can send the call to, and hopefully it's a day when they have an ambulance in service and ready to go. So my next question was, so I call 911, I say I have a medical emergency, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about how to communicate to 911 before the end of this video. But I say I have a medical emergency, how do they find me? Because addresses in Mexico are much less standardized. Many people don't have addresses, some roads don't have names, so how does the ambulance find me?
Por la información y referencia. So they're able to locate the emergency scene from their experience. So a lot of the paramedics, they already know the streets. We don't have any numbers. Most of the streets don't have numbers. So there's references come into play a lot. So if you say it's a white house, it's a 2-story house, that helps a lot. And also sometimes, depending on who's on board, they might use their GPS if they don't have a reference, or they can't find the location.
Okay, so now I know where the ambulance is going to find me, but I guess the question I had was, how long does it take? Because, in the United States, there's this expectation that this is a pretty quick thing. So we've got one of the volunteers here. The folks in the red shirts are volunteers. They are trained, and we'll talk about that. But I want to ask them, how quickly can I expect something here in Centenario?
So it takes about 30 minutes or up to 40 minutes from La Paz to Centenario, but when we do have our service active here, then it takes about 10 minutes to arrive to the scene.
So specifically in Centenario, I want to know if there were folks located here that can help out in an emergency. Mario is bilingual, so he's going to answer that question without a translator.
Yes, fortunately not that we have the Association of Firefighters here located in Centenario. We have trained personnel that is available in case of emergencies. Actually, we're doing shifts on the weekends, and also with this ambulance that was provided by the Protección Civil, that these guys are helping out the community very, very well. So you can rest assured that in case of an emergency, we will have someone to help you out.
Okay, so now that the ambulance has made it to my house, I'm wondering, what can the paramedics or the medics on the ambulance do for me? What can I expect in terms of the services that they can provide?
Iniciando con la valoración de la escena.
So the first thing they do is they evaluate the scene, they evaluate the patient, and they also check their vital signs. And they also they do have a defibrillator, and they also have oxygen in case they need it while they transfer them to the hospital.
So I wanted to have a look around the inside of an ambulance. So we have the instructor here who's going to tell us all about the ambulance, and we're still going to get those translations for you. So ¿qué cosas está aquí?
Equipo en movilización. Equipo en movilización. Equipo médico, como son vendajes. ¿Sí? Estabilización. Tenemos área de curaciones.
Sí.
Oxigenoterapia. Parte de los equipos de desfibriladores.
Sí.
Botiquines de primera respuesta. También tenemos equipo de inmovilización,
sí,
de sujeción, más aparte algunos aditamentos de soporte cervical.
Sí, y hay oxígeno aquí.
Sí, que va conectado en la parte de abajo. Acá tenemos los distribuidores o difusores. El segundo asiento para un segundo paramédico.
Sí.
Y el prestador de servicios.
Perfecto. So I was wondering about whether folks here, the medics, people who are in the ambulance are trained or how well they are trained. Let's see what we can expect in the folks that are inside the ambulance.
Existen normas oficiales.
So there are some norms that fall under the health department, and one of the norms is in 034. So, and these norms, they oversee the first responders certification, and they also oversee the paramedics or medical technicians and their different categories, basic, intermediate, or advanced.
Okay, so then I know in the United States, ambulances are expensive. You're going to pay at least $1,000 if you take a ride in the back of an ambulance. I did that, I think, last year. So the question I have for down here is, what expectation is there? What is it going to cost to take an ambulance to a hospital?
No, definitivamente no.
So there is no fee, there's no charge, there's no income, especially to the volunteers groups. So the only income that they receive is the income that they get either from vouchers, for example, given to them by some government institutions, not all the time, or by some of the local businesses. Or sometimes the family of the victims might want to donate, but it's not mandatory. This is in regards to the volunteer groups. In regards to the government groups, the employees or the paramedics, they do have a salary, but they don't charge the patient or the family for the transfer. So it's a free service.
So one more thing that came up is just like if you have to take a long ambulance trip. Here in La Paz, we are where the state government is, so we have the best hospitals here. But if you're further away in a smaller community, you might need to get transferred with an ambulance all the way down to La Paz, which might be a 5 or 6 hour drive. We're going to hear what happens at that point, what the expectation is.
So as you know, there's no fee for the transfer to the hospital. However, if you're located in a rural town outside of the county seat, or outside of the capital of the state, which is La Paz, and you're maybe 6 hours away from here and you need specialized medical attention, we have the best hospitals here, and you have to transfer yourself or the patient down here, a lot of the times the family will pay for the fuel. So that's the only time where the family will have to cover the fuel expenses when it's long distance trips.
So I do see the police more often than I see an ambulance. So I was wondering how they are connected in what's their role in an emergency.
The police, they do a whole range of activities or functions, when there's an emergency to help the paramedics and help the first responders. Because of their location, they're closer to the community. They're usually the first ones to arrive to the scene, and when they arrive, they immediately coordinate the communication back to C4 or back to the command post, and they verify that there is an emergency taking place, and they provide more information that they might not know. And they also help with the paramedics or the ambulance accessing the emergency scene, because a lot of the times, like we said earlier, they don't know where the emergency is located, so they usually help them by giving them directions or by having their lights on. Now, if there's also any hostile, anyone becoming a little bit aggressive, or any sort of domestic violence, they also help with that, and they also help if they have to coordinate just the traffic. They also provide that service. And finally, if they have to transfer the victim or the patient to the hospital, they could also, depending on the gravity of the injury, they'll actually make way, open the roads up so that the ambulance can arrive sooner at the hospital.
So I also wanted to know what the difference was between an ambulance in the United States and an ambulance down here in Mexico, because like I mentioned, I was in an ambulance not too long ago, and this one is much smaller than what I was used to. So I brought out Warren, and he is an expat. He is a retired fireman, and is down here now and volunteers with the local association.
Probably the single biggest difference between the medical service here and the medical service in the United States is financial support for their organizations. That's the biggest problem. And because of lack of funding, depending upon the group, you may have various amounts of equipment that we would normally associate with an ambulance service in the United States, and it may not be here. So that's probably the biggest difference. The rules, the regulations are very, very similar. The list of equipment that's required to be on a certified ambulance here in Mexico is virtually identical to the ones in the U.S.
What about medications and painkillers, things like that?
Medications, again, depending upon the ambulance crew and their level of training and their medical direction and what they're authorized to do. Some are authorized to administer, some aren't. Some are authorized to put in airways, some aren't. So again, it's very similar to the U.S. Very similar.
I mentioned that I was going to tell you about calling 911. So you can call 911, you could call the local police department if you have that number. The dispatchers use WhatsApp, so that's a possibility too. But you should know some basic Spanish, and don't try to go in depth, because there's a good chance that they don't speak Spanish or they don't speak English, or they speak very basic English. So they might be able to say, my name is, but they might not be able to say, where does it hurt? And if you can't explain that, that could be a problem. So when you're on the phone with 911, emergencia, medico, where your house is, es azul, es blanco, mi casa es azul, mi casa es blanco. So learn some of those basic phrases. And your best friend here is Google Translate. So have that on your phone. That way you can describe things really well, and then it can even speak it out to them when they're at your house or when you're calling 911. But don't try to go really into depth. Let's just get you to the hospital. Another thing that Warren pointed out was it's really good if you have a more complicated medical condition to have that translated. Write out what it is and have it translated, and maybe even record it in Spanish so that you can explain it to the 911 operator or the paramedics or someone at the hospital. I've noticed here most of the doctors speak English. And one more thing, you can ask to be transferred to a specific hospital. That's a whole nother video about finding the hospital in your community or a doctor. So I don't yet have that video, but when I do, it'll be up after this one. So another great point that these folks made was that you should know your neighbors. You may have a doctor or a nurse for a neighbor. You may have someone who's bilingual for a neighbor, and they can help you out in these situations. So be sure to connect with your neighbors. The person who bought the lot next to my house is a doctor, so I can't wait for him to move in. So we talked about emergencies in this video, but I've got another video up here about going to a local doctor, which is a great deal in Mexico. I'll see you over in that video.